How many times do you think the brain or a brain-like system evolved independently?
Where? On Earth?
Everywhere.
Well, obviously, I think this is something that can happen easily. Um, I shouldn't say easily, but the extent that I think that it could happen on Earth, it certainly happened a couple of times. Nervous systems have happened a couple of times. Certainly in insects and vertebrates, it's a common ancestry. But we go back to the ancestors of octopi and squids and so on. It's probably a relatively separate system. But that suggests to me that once something like neurons are around, once you've got mobile creatures like animals that have to find food and escape predators and have to find a place to live and so on, you've got to have a predictive system that allows you to move and predict. And so I would imagine wherever in the cosmos something like that happens, there's going to be something like a nervous system, and they're going to work relatively similar. There's just a lot of constraints on what can happen.
I love the way you went outside of Earth. I intended the question to be Earth, but I love the way you went outside. Do you think that if you would to bet now, do you think a nervous system or a brain-like system has evolved off of Earth?
Oh, I think probably, given the size of the cosmos, I would, and
Yeah,
the age of the cosmos, we're fairly recent in our evolution. Given the age of the cosmos, I imagine there's many. Now, in the long, what do you need to get there? I mean, first of all, you need to have a huge energy source like oxygen. So you need to have something like photosynthesis to generate a lot of oxygen. But once you've got that kind of high energy source so that you can now create large mobile creatures, you need something like a nervous system. And
so
how would
cool.
it work? Well, it's got to work. It's got to have the kind of velocity of information transmission that ionic systems have. So I think there'll be a lot of similarities. And it may well be, we don't know for sure, but it looks like neuron-like structures have evolved independently maybe twice. In the ancestors of comb jellies and stuff like that. It looks like
Right.
a separate evolution of that kind of uh, cell type has come about. We don't know that they have a common ancestor, but we can't tell for sure. So under those circumstances, I'll bet that this is not an uncommon feature.
So cool. Such an exciting possibility. Do we know when this happened roughly on Earth? What does the best evidence say to dating those primitive nervous systems?
Good question. Certainly, it's just before the Cambrian. We see this in things that look a little bit like um, like primitive spiders and that's that sort of thing. We see very simple nervous systems appearing, and I would guess that they appeared multiple ways and multiple times. Uh, in terms of neurons themselves, I think it goes back quite a bit further than that. Um, but I don't have a strong sense of exactly when that happened.
Yeah, you hear many different figures. I've heard all the way back as far back as 700 million years ago, potentially,
Oh, I
but
think at
very
least
hard to
that.
know.
I
Yeah,
think
at
at
least
least
that.
that. Yeah.
Very
Now, so the
cool.
question is, so there's nervous systems and there's nerve nets, and in comb jellies and jellyfish, you just have a ring of neurons, and so it's not actually a brain. When we see brains developing, you really have to have a bilaterally symmetric front back animal. Uh, so you have a direction of movement. You have to have your sensors towards the front, that sort of thing. So that may have been in the range of 5 to 700 million years ago. Yeah, I would say that's not wrong.
Do you think there's any structure that existed in those most primitive nervous systems that are still remnants today in human beings?
Well, neurons haven't changed much. So neurons really, once they were discovered, they're just a great tool, and they seem to have been around a long time. So I would say that the basic structure of neurons, which use a lot of features that other cell types use, but just specialized. So I think neurons have been around a long time, and so the kind of neurons that we have, although they vary in different parts of the brain. They're basically the same structure, and I don't think they've changed significantly.
How do we actually do we know that they haven't changed? I mean, neuron
So
type cells.
yeah, the key is, of course, you do it's a comparative analysis, and so
Yeah.
we want to look at that groups that are very, very separate, that we know have a deep, deep ancestry. And if we find what we find is homologs between them, then we can guess that they had a common ancestry, and that's what throws it back so far. Now, what does that mean? It means they've got to have things like synapses. They've got to have ionic pumps on their surface and stuff like that, and axons and dendrites. Uh, those are pretty ancient, and we find them, really distributed. I mean, you find them in sea slugs, and you find them in us. So they have a pretty deep ancestry.
Do you think there's a very good reason that nervous systems have the shape and function that they do? Could a different type of nervous system that didn't rely on these ion pumps across a membrane, electrical polarization, like were these all just kind of chance features of physiology that caught on, and then once it evolved, it was very favorable and kind of it just spread? Or do you think that there are lots of different forms that a nervous system could have taken?
No, I think it would have had to involve something like ion pumps, had to involve something like polarization, and then the propagation of polarization that you see in axons, for example. I think those things are really necessary, just given the rate. Now, what kind of molecules? Probably the same thing: sodium, potassium, calcium are the molecules. Why? Because they're highly prevalent. They
Yes.
dissolve easily. They become great ions. Um, so I suspect there'd be a lot of similarity. Exactly what molecules become the pumping molecules and so on, that could probably vary quite a bit. But I think the molecules that have chosen, just like the molecules of life with carbon at its center, carbon is such a prevalent atom, and oxygen, all the molecules that make up life are basically, with the exception of helium, all the most plentiful atoms in the cosmos. So, it shouldn't surprise us. So, in that respect, I suspect life, even as we've been talking about, off this planet,
Right.
separated by tens of billions of years of evolution, maybe. I would guess it would use some of the same tricks.
That's staggering, isn't it? It was you caught me. The next question I was going to ask was, if you got a newspaper headline tomorrow, nervous system found on alternate planet, do you
Uh-huh.
think you could make like predictions about what that nervous system might look like? That there's a good reason that it might actually work through proton gradients, ion channels, like these basic physiology we have of life today. There's actually reason that would have evolved on a different planet as well.
Yeah, I think so. Now, again, like I say, the functional continuity would be there. The actual molecules, the kind of protein-like molecules that may be doing a lot of the work, might be quite different. But they'd have to use some of the same raw materials.
That's so cool. That's a staggering fact to me.
Yeah, and I think, I think as we begin to understand life off the Earth, we'll begin to understand, how many constraints are actually there by just virtue of what's more likely in the universe, and what are the functional things that need to happen. I think we're going to be surprised at how similar things are. Now,
Right.
what I should say is, at the atomic level, at the actual molecule level, there might be quite radical differences, but what they end up doing is going to be a lot similar. Something like oxygen would have to be there to have large mobile creatures, because you got to have a big energy source.
But it might be so the sodium potassium ions that we use to pump across our neuronal membranes, those might not be necessarily as specific, that they might have been because of the
Well, I,
particular
I think sodium,
composition.
again, I think
You-
sodium and potassium, given their high probability, their easy solubility in water, are likely to
okay.
be sodium, potassium, and calcium, the three that are most prevalent. Uh,
Okay.
I think, it's obvious that they'd be the ones to use. Use the tools that are there.
Have you thought about any particular module that might change a lot, that That doesn't
Mm,
seem as obvious. That doesn't seem as apparent in nature because of the chemical composition of the atmosphere. Like, is there anything that you could say, well, that actually could be quite different?
My sense is that things like proteins and nucleic acids, way down in the simplest level, I think those could be different. And
Interesting.
yet you'd have to have something that, is a good memory source like DNA and RNA, good replicable memory source. And you need to have large globular molecules that can serve a lot of structural and enzymatic functions like proteins. But I actually think that proteins are a special case.
Hmm.
And that what we find in our solar system, for example, is a lot of hydrogen cyanide and formalin related molecules. Um, Formamide and hydrogen cyanide that can form pretty complicated large molecules. As a result, they'll look a little bit like proteins, look a little bit like amino acids, but probably different. I think those the specifics are probably unique for life, but the general kinds of functions I think have to be there.
The Giant Shoulder mission is to explore radical ideas in biology, neuroscience, and consciousness and elevate those stories to the highest possible level while keeping them accessible to everyone. If this interests you and you want to support independent science, then please consider subscribing to the Clips channel. Check out our 26 Neuroscience book. You can download it for free